And one of the first acts of the government in 2014, I don't know if you remember that, was to destroy the documents related to Gandhi's assassination. But don't forget, it was a Vajpayee who saved the person who was in power when the Gujarat massacre happened. You see in Manipur what we saw in Gujarat, which is the refusal of the state to allow people to dialogue and come together after a conflict. That the abdication of the media in India after 2014 is something that history will really blame us for. State laws like KOCA, MACOCA, Public Security Act of Kashmir, Public Security Act of Chhattisgarh, Public Security Act in Tamil Nadu, and even the Dravidian governments are using it. Even the Kerala government here, CPM government is using UAPA. This extremely intensive brainwashing and transformation of individual, society and state that the RSS is responsible for. For me, the greatest danger is the organization called the RSS.
Hello everyone. Today we have one of the forthright, outspoken Indian civil rights activist and journalist, Teesta Setalvad, to share her views and experience with Keraleeyam Talk. She has been at the forefront in combating communalism and building peace and justice in our country. She was arrested by the Gujarat Anti-Terrorist Squad and was granted regular bail on 19 July 2023 by the Supreme Court of India. For obvious reasons, we would not be talking about the cases pending against her in the court, but about other important matters of contemporary India. Welcome, Teesta. You have been a constant source of inspiration and energy for civil rights activists in India. And you started your career as a journalist in the mainstream media. Then you started communalism combat and media intervention, independent media intervention, then Citizens for Peace, Justice and Peace. And in spite of all these cases against you, you're fighting the battle very strongly. Could you please talk about what is the driving force behind your work as a social activist?
Actually, it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly what the driving force is, but I think if one looks at the journey that contemporary India has taken for the last 35 years, approximately 31 to 38 years, I think that itself will explain to your viewers why it was necessary to step out of the box in a way and undertake a journey which is a collective journey. Actually, it was not an individual journey, it was a journey of a collective set of people to make journalism more meaningful and accountable in one sense. That is why Communalism Combat after August 93 to November 2012, and then sabrangindia.in, which is our portal, and a constant engagement with the quote-unquote mainstream media, alternate media, space, video, is because media plays such a critical role in any democracy. The role of questioning, the role of determining how deep your democratic institutions are, how accountable they are. Because I mean, the phrase fourth estate comes from somewhere. It comes from an understanding that you're meant to be the fundamental pillar in a democracy of the people, for the people, by the people, which means you question government policy. So that, and secondly, the shift in Indian state and politics from a kind of left-center welfare state to something which is majoritarian, weaponized, aggressive, and far right, both socio-economically and religiously, a majoritarian state. That journey is, I think, determined our choice, my choice of doing the work I do.
And recently, you were arrested by the Gujarat Anti-Terrorist Squad, and you had to spend in the jail more than 2 months. And just let me ask about the data revealed, published by the prison statistics. It says that 2/3 of the prisoners belong to Dalits, Adivasis and OBCs, and 66% of them are most of them illiterate, or they have not gone to the class until 10th, and also 19% of them are Muslims. Why do you think why there is a disproportionate rate of these people prisoners belong to this category of community?
Yeah, it's a good question. However much you do human rights work on the issue of prisons and prison watch like we did in our college days, to actually be in prison gives you a very different level of experience, and mine was also very, very searing experience in Gujarat's Sabarmati jail. Basically, it's a structural issue, that of structural discrimination. Baba Saheb Ambedkar said presciently, tomorrow is Constitution Day, and he said on 26 November 1949 that we are embarking on a dangerous path, where we are giving ourselves political democracy, but our bedrock is social inequality and economic disparity. And I think that is reflected in our systems of governance. So Indian democracy is still, even before 2014, which I see as a sharp regression from the democratic path, from the democratic realization of India becoming a democracy. I think we were trying to make our structures more democratic, more accountable, more representative, etc. We had not reached there, even in 2014. We were attempting that. Therefore our prisons, therefore our arrests. You have a police structure, you have a governance structure, judicial structure, which is extremely non-representative, discriminatory even. So is it any wonder that those who get picked up, those who are under trial, and the figures tell us there are close to 500,000 of them all over the country. I was one of them last year, and don't use the word illiterate, say unlettered, because I think in a way they are as literate as you and me. They just don't have the letter. They don't have the ability to write or to read. And yes, because it is the babu, it is the bureaucracy, it is the political police oppression that actually traps them in these cases. So what is defined as theft, what is criminalized, who is criminalized for what, all this is determined by a discriminatory understanding of governance. So I remember when I was in jail, for instance, there was a whole bunch of women with their children who was in the same cell as I was, barrack number 6, who were picked up for sandal ki chori. Sandal ki chori. Sandal is sandalwood ki chori.
Okay.
Now it's one thing to have the jungles of Tamil Nadu, where you have the big smuggling done of sandalwood. This is not that. This is little bands of people who are caught outside, quote unquote, caught outside temples and places of worship, because they are dealing with little blocks of sandalwood or little idols made of sandalwood. I read their charge sheets. They are adamant that it's not robbery, that they have got these legitimately. Yet they are picked up and they are jailed for months, and then they have to pay bail, and their bail they can't afford because they're from a section. So it's any number of such stories. Unfortunately, there is no accountability for the Indian police force. We remain a colonial police force. We have not liberated our police force and made it democratic or accountable. So there's no complaint authority. There's nobody to ask, who are you arresting, why are you arresting, where are you taking them? And which is why you have those sections of our society. You said Dalits, OBCs, minorities, who are anyway discriminated against in society.
Correct.
Also being in jail.
So do you think that when you describe this thing, do you think that we need also judicial reforms, which is very important in our country?
We need administrative reform, police reform, judicial reform, reform to our criminal justice system as a whole. Because like I said, we were a democracy in the making. And it was happening. It's not like it's not happening, but very slowly, because the class and the section that is within the institution is reluctant to change. So until there's pressure from the people, a democratic pressure, a peaceful pressure. I'll give you an example. How was the Forest Rights Act enacted in 2006? I used to teach the constitution workshops with my Adivasi friends, leaders. I'm also vice president of the All India Union of Forest Workers. And I used to talk to them about 5th schedule and 6th schedule, Adivasi rights. And they would turn around and ask me that why did it take your constitution, they used to ask me, 56 years to give us the Forest Rights Act. So this business of becoming a living democracy, repealing colonial laws, that it's not yet happened. We still have the Indian Forest Act of 1927 brought in by the British. There was a Forest Act earlier of the 1800s brought in because they wanted to curb the Adivasi rebellion in the forests. We have not repealed that. We just brought another act in response to the demand of the Adivasis and forest dwellers. But the Forest Rights Act continues to oppress. So we are in, the negotiation is on, and mostly it's peaceful. Sometimes it becomes fractious and conflict-ridden. And now we are dealing with a proto-fascist majoritarian regime.
Yeah, let me come to that point. Yeah. For 7 decades, India has been held together by Indian Constitution, which offers equality to everyone. But recent years in Modi regimes, it is remaking India, where some citizens are more Indians than others. So do you think that the people of India will be able to resist Modi's fascism and they can come out of the hole which they have fallen into?
Time will tell, history will tell. I don't have an answer to that right away, but the effort has to be made, and a rigorous effort has to be made. I just like to say that it's about an ideological takeover of the Indian state and an attempt to transfer a republic which was founded on constitutional values based on the Constituent Assembly debates, our constitution, to a autocratic, theocratic state, Hindutva. So from a notion of composite nationhood, correct, you move to religion-based nationhood, discriminatory governance. And you see, that is what I always use the demolition of the Babri Masjid as a metaphor. Because I think it was a point of arrival for these forces, these retrograde forces who also killed Gandhi on the 30th of January 1948. That was the first act of terror in independent India. And they did it because they did not want a constitution to remain in force. But at that time, the country reacted, the people reacted, and I think the same forces worked at society, worked at politics to kind of did what they did on 6th of December 1992. Why did they choose 6th December? That's another story. Because it's Baba Sahib Ambedkar's Mahaparinirvan Divas, which Dalits actually observe in hundreds of thousands. But now they wanted to make it into a Shaurya Divas for all Hindus coming together. So there were many sub-layers to that attack. It was an attack on the constitution, attack on secularism, a direct attack on the minorities, and attack on Dalits. So that's a point of departure for secular India, which India still needs to recover from. We need to really understand the schisms caused by that movement, majoritarian movement, which debased words like secular into pseudo-secular and many things like that. So what we are facing today is an attempt to completely turn us into a form of discriminatory governance and a theocratic state. Will our institutions resist it? Will our people resist it? Is the question before us. 2024 will provide some answers. December 3 will provide some answers. And also how the judiciary functions will provide more answers, and how the Election Commission conducts the elections will provide other answers.
And you wrote a very important book, Beyond Doubt, a dossier on Gandhi's assassination, which collects lots of important documents from the archives and the reference and all. So you were presuming that when the regime comes to power, the information or this historical data will be destroyed. You had that assumption before?
There was an NDA 1. You're very young, so I don't know. There was an NDA 1 between 1999 and 2004. Fortunately, they were a minority government, and they still consisted of men, though like Advani, who had kind of led the hate march with the Rath Yatra and who had actually legitimized hate politics in this country with the violence that preceded and followed his Rath Yatra all over the country. They still were parliamentarians of a kind, so they didn't want to completely squash the opposition, and they were not so crude, if you like. But don't forget, it was a Vajpayee who saved the person who was in power when the Gujarat massacre happened, And now we have a majority government. And one of the first acts of the government in 2014, I don't know if you remember that, was to destroy the documents related to Gandhi's assassination in the Home Ministry. And many historians, about 27 historians, top historians of the country, wrote a public letter saying that don't destroy these documents, but it made no difference. Even today we don't know which are the documents destroyed. Now, what are those documents? Those are the ones I've published in this collection. The cabinet decision after Gandhi was assassinated, the letter of Sardar Patel, Vallabhbhai Patel, India's first Home Minister, to Golwalkar, to Govind Vallabh Pant on Ram Mandir. All these documents are there, which actually tell us that Sardar Patel himself, apart from Jawaharlal Nehru, was also in favor of banning the RSS. The Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh was banned after Gandhi's assassination because though Godse had been a member, may not have been a member, this nitpicking, the fact is RSS members, according to Patel's letter, distributed sweets after Gandhiji's assassination. So they were gloating and happy at the fact that Gandhi had been killed. Even today, they play footsie with Gandhi. They need the symbol, but they valorize Godse. That is what the RSS stands for. That is what this leadership and regime stands for.
Correct.
So I thought it was important to bring that publication out. And I don't know if you have seen it because it's also available in Malayalam. And it's not my original writing, all of it, though I've written a very well-researched intro. But there was a very senior mentor of mine who was a Marathi journalist, Jagan Fadnis. He unfortunately died early because of cancer. But in 1998, he first published a book in Marathi called Mahatmanse Akher, which is the last few days of Gandhi. And when I read that book, because I read Marathi as well as I read my mother tongue, Gujarati, first time I came to know, as a young journalist, that there were 5 attempts on Gandhi's life. 5.
Yes.
Before the one that killed him. It was not common knowledge before that. He was the first one to bring this out. And the first one was in 1934, when there was no question of Pakistan, when there was no question of anything.
Yeah.
It was basically because Gandhi stood against caste and because he stood for composite nationhood. So this myth that the right wing has created, particularly RSS has created, that it is because of that 55 crores to Pakistan, etc., because he was pro-Muslim, he was an appeaser, that is why he was killed, is actually hogwash. It is not borne out by history. In the 5 attempts before the 6th one that killed him, at least in 2 attempts before that, Godse was involved.
Correct.
So it was premeditated, it was a conspiracy in which many of these Hindutva organizations were involved. And even the gun, as Tushar Gandhi has said in his book, came out of Gwalior and this thing, and it was very closely linked to people of the Hindu Mahasabha.
Do you think there was a kind of negligence from the Indian government because the 6th attempt was successful?
I'm doing a 2nd volume on the Kapoor Commission report, so when I annotate that, you'll have the answer. There seemed to be a laxity in security. Yeah. But Gandhi himself had refused it. But there seemed to be many of those issues. It was
held in Birla Mandir, which was in the where they have.
So there are those issues, and I think it's important for younger people to get to know the Kapoor Commission report, which I'll be bringing up.
Okay, we will come to Modi's economic policies. We could see a radical shift from crony capitalism to oligarchic capitalism in Modi's regime. So where few of the capitalist forces are getting upper hand. So, and brazenly neglected equality, social justice. So do you think that decoding Hindutva corporate alliance is very important to prevail justice in our country, social justice and economic justice?
Yeah, for a long time, many of us have felt that along with kind of understanding the RSS and understanding the ideological underpinning of this regime, which is majoritarian and upper caste based, it's also important to understand how the neoliberal shift of the Indian economy, which was ironically begun by Narasimha Rao of the Congress, and he was the Prime Minister when the Babri Masjid was demolished, so let's not forget that. That there is a connection between the forces that have been unleashed through this extremely aggressive move of private resources to public capital. Now, it was happening before. It's not as if it started under this regime. It started with the neoliberal regime where you started neglecting public education, public health. So this regime is not only responsible for it, but it sharpened very, very drastically under this regime, which chose a few among the capitalists, like you said, the oligarchies, and also completely decimated our public transport, our railways, our health system, so that, and has created a level of joblessness and unemployment that before 2014 was only evidenced in the state of Gujarat, where the Gujarat model, which this brand of industrialist tom-tommed, ironically, was actually, like Prabhat Patnaik wrote in another book which I edited on the Gujarat model, was actually concentration of capital in a few hands. It was jobless growth. I don't know if you've read Professor Atul Sood's book on Gujarat,
yes.
Poverty Amidst Plenty.
Yes.
And it tells you about the complete lack of social security, lack of labor security, poor wages, poor health in Gujarat, even while Gujarat was tom-tom as a Gujarat model.
Yeah.
So I don't understand that the same media, electronic media, that somewhat criticized 2002 carnage and the violence, still praised the Gujarat model. I don't want to name the personalities, you know them, but I think it's got to do with who backed those channels. That the electronic media channels were backed by certain business forces who had an interest in backing that model. So you're seeing a stranglehold on Indian democracy, if you like, between the far economic right and the far social religious right.
So do you think the corporate interest for land and resource also had a predominant role in the recent conflict in Manipur, which later the BJP cadres also participated, and there was a continuous violence for several weeks?
You know, Manipur is just so shocking, I cannot even begin to talk about it, you know, that we lived through the kind of abdication of responsibility of the state in Gujarat, but this takes you to another level, because since May 3rd of this year, you had continuing conflict, and now, I mean, we are in touch with many groups there from both the Maitei side and the Kuki side, and we find that with the harvesting of the poppy seed and the drugs that is imminent now, conflict is expected to resume. So, you know, whether it is taking out the land for palm oil production, or whether it is the political patronage of this kind of drug trade, all of this is kind of contributing to that conflict. And human life and human suffering has been taken a back seat. And in fact, you see in Manipur what we saw in Gujarat, which is the refusal of the state to allow people to dialogue and come together after a conflict. And that is really tragic.
So do you think there was no sign of abating the violence in Manipur for several weeks, and Modi took 79 days to break his silence, and even Biren Singh government also was not effective in taking steps to curb the violence, right? And it continued for several weeks, we know. And do you think that there was some kind of similarities, the way the Gujarat government took the response in 2002 violence, in communal violence there, and Manipur violence? Is there any similarities?
I just mentioned that there is a similarity in terms of abdication of responsibility by the state. And even there you had a friendly government at the center which refused to dismiss the Gujarat government. But I think what made a difference between then and now, and that I think is a little difference between our institutions of democracy as we see them, that you had an active NHRC in 2002, you had a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Verma, who did an outstanding report on Gujarat, not once but twice. You had the media. That is something which is very vital to this conversation, if we are media people, that the abdication of the media in India after 2014 is something that history will really blame us for. And fortunately, some of us are in the smaller alternate space and valiantly trying to raise our voices and continue the good fight. But the overwhelming part of the electronic media is completely subservient, both economically to the government and ideologically to the government. Worse, the electronic media is part of a hate project, which is using its news hour in the evenings to generate more conflict. So in that sense, Manipur is worse in a way compared to Gujarat, because that media space which you had at that time, which was a mitigator, because it conscientized the rest of India to what happened in Gujarat. You know, I mean, otherwise how would people get to know? And today that media is not doing its job on Manipur. I mean, I'd like to know how many of the electronic media channels visited Manipur and did proper ground coverage. You know, and it's amazing what, portals like The Wire and Scroll and many independent journalists did on their own as individuals and through smaller platforms. But otherwise, the larger electronic media television houses was shocking on Manipur. It is despicable. In fact, there should be a media analysis of the abdication of the media on Manipur. It's shocking. Yeah. You know how long the internet has been shut down there? And internet being shut down means democratic rights being shut down.
Yes.
It means your access to know, your access to information is shut down. Your access to apply for jobs is shut down. And yet the media doesn't care. So, you know, I find this amazing abdication by the media, which can only happen in an authoritarian, majoritarian, proto-fascist regime. And I think that, I sometimes wonder why Indians don't get angry, why don't they protest? Like you had the Black Lives Matter protests in the United States, you had huge protests in Israel last year, beginning of this year, when the judiciary was attempted to be compromised. I don't see those numbers here in terms of protests. And it's very frustrating, and I think the media has played a big role in deadening people's conscience.
So do you think that one side, as you said, we have a larger number of subservient media, but on the other hand, we can find also new platforms which is emerging, which is more independent, which now people are more getting attracted towards. Don't you think so? Maybe
Obviously,
small in number.
We are all part of it, but the point is that overwhelmingly the electronic media channels reach is so much more. And of course we tell ourselves that people are not watching and people are boycotting. A small section is. But I think we can't run away from actually pinning the blame on the media, and what is the structure of ownership and what is the advantage that these owners are getting from the present government for the kind of massive damage to democracy that they are doing. I mean, they are the ones who are demolishing the opposition. They are the ones, I mean, at so many levels it is a dishonesty that is going on by the electronic media. It's far worse than the Fox channel in the United States. It's much, much worse than that. And I don't think we are talking about it enough in India. In holding the electronic media in the talk and responsible as citizens, saying you are destroying our democracy.
Let's come to another topic, that is Godhra train burning was triggered the continuous communal violence in Gujarat in 2002. So recently there was a revelation by Shankar Singh Waghela, the ex-chief minister of Gujarat and earlier senior member of BJP, that there is a possibility of a group of people outside the Muslim community who planned and implemented the burning. So do you think that there is the need of fair and independent enquiry into Godhra train burning?
You know, you said at the beginning on my introduction that you will not speak about my case. And this is simply my case. So this is the, I mean, I don't know if you're aware of the Zakia Jafri case. Yeah. It actually dealt with the build-up to Godhra and all that. So it's all there in the documents we presented to the court. So I'd much rather that is not spoken about here.
Okay. So we know that the supremacy of the right wing was not an instantaneous phenomena. It had a long historical trajectory in our country. So even the Congress or the UPA government contributed in the growth of right-wing forces in India. So do you think that being an important part of Alliance India, Congress has a larger responsibility, or they have to revisit the past mistake? Even they introduced some draconian laws and the neoliberal policies. So they have to find out the flaws in their policies and admit the mistakes in front of the public and take more responsibility in the forthcoming elections.
You have to give me a minute for me to reply to this because it's a process. You've been very patient. You know, the entire phenomenon of communalism and communal violence and abdication of the state, like you yourself said, is decades old. It's not new. But I think we also need to understand, and our viewers need to understand, that this country has had partition. And this country has had a very brutal partition. And the partition of our country on religious lines has also left some scars. So, and when we started Communalism Combat, it was after the brutal violence in my city, Bombay, then Bombay, now Mumbai, after the demolition of the Babri Masjid. And one of our mission statement, the mission statement of Communalism Combat was that we are against majority and minority communalism. And I would like to begin with that when I talk about the Congress Party. That yes, I think the Congress Party has to accept and admit both publicly and through its actions that it has actually understood some of its historical errors that it made in not just not containing communalism, but in actually playing both the worst kinds of game with both kinds of communalism. Obviously, it is the majority communalism that can transform the state, but minority communalism can feed into the majority so that the middle roader in the majority begins to look at the minority in a prejudiced way, so that the cleavage grows. And I just want to give two examples which are well spoken about, that on the one hand you open the locks of the Babri Masjid, and on the other hand you pass the Muslim Women Protection Bill after the Shah Banu case. And that way you keep quote unquote both sides happy. And you're playing with fire. You're playing with fire because instead of deepening the ideas of secularism, understanding, social justice and dialogue, you want to actually encourage the retrograde elements in both sections. And I think therefore our definition of secularism has to be equality for all and discrimination to none. And it has to apply to secularizing our society as well, within communities. Like I feel that within minority communities, an understanding of gender, an understanding of inter-community, caste, all these issues become necessary.
But can we equate minority communalism and majoritarian communalism? Because majoritarian communalism has an upper hand because minority communities, they don't have socially, culturally powerful, even they don't have powerful institutional support. So can we really equate these two?
I think I'd like you to read a little bit about our partition violence and ask the question back to you. There was only one community responsible during the partition violence.
No.
At that point, the Muslim minority had 25%, which is not really a minority. Okay? And if you look at the three different regions of the country, Bengal, Punjab and Bihar, three communities were both perpetrators and victims. And if you want to tackle communalism effectively in this country, you have to understand that every community has a tendency towards majoritarianism. Having said that, I said myself that majority communalism actually endangers the state. But minority communalism contributes to a desecularization of society and communalizing of the majority by its actions. For instance, let me ask you, why should a large number of Muslim male clergy come out on the streets like in 1986, like they did, to oppose 125 rupees maintenance for a Muslim woman? Why? I mean, they could have just said it's a judgment of the court, and the court, if we live in a secular country, and the Supreme Court judgment is supreme. No, but the language they used was, don't interfere in our personal laws. Now, is that a secular language?
Yeah,
is that a secular language? If I'm looking at women's rights,
yeah.
If I'm looking at maintenance rights, is it right to say that when it comes to equality of women, you have to keep our women within our fold? Moment you start that language, it's a never-ending battle between the majority and the minority, which the minority will not win. And you result in a desecularizing of society.
I totally agree with you.
So, no, my point is that unfortunately the minority leadership in this country has been interested in a politics of patronage, not in a language of rights.
Right.
The first time we saw a robust movement for democratic rights was the anti-CAA, anti-NPR, anti-NRC protests, where young Muslims, Muslim women from Shaheen Bagh led the movement, and they were asserting their citizenship of this country. And see what the state did in response. It was not a religious movement, it was a secular movement. And that's the kind of movements we need from the minority community, that assert their rights.
Yeah, of course, there is a lot of need for reforms in the religion itself. There is no, I fully agree with you, but the argument against minority communalism is they are a threat to the territorial integrity of our nation. That's why they are more focused and attacked.
Don't throw a R.S.S. argument at me. I am making an independent argument. And I have every right to make that. That I feel the history of this subcontinent is a history of majority and minority communalism resulting in the most brutal partition this country has seen, in huge killings and the migration of 100,000 people. There's never been such a mass migration before. Maybe Kerala didn't experience it,
yeah.
But large sections of India have, and those wounds still fester. We've not talked about it. The secular government post-independence did not speak about it, did not have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I think we need to understand that if you want our state to remain secular and our society to remain secular, all sections of society will also have to secularize themselves while keeping their religious and cultural practices. When it comes to gender, human rights, dignity, I mean, what is it? Let me ask you a question. What about queer rights among the Christian and Muslim community? Should we not speak about them? LGBTQIA rights? Should we say that it's a minority problem? That's not what the LGBTQI is saying. They say we want to talk about it. They are also a minority. Suppose they say religious beliefs don't talk about LGBTQ among Muslims or Christians or Sikhs. I think we need to be able to say that if we are talking about secularizing of state and society, all communities will have to join in. And obviously the threat to India today, the proto-fascist threat, is from majority communalism. But minority communalism historically and today plays a part in communalizing the majority. That is definitely my historical understanding.
Okay, so now we have completed 75 years of independence. So when we look back, we can find that there is lots of reasons to find fundamental flaws in our democratic system, and we have faced lots of challenges in these years. So do you think, what are the main stumbling blocks in the process of, or in the advancement of democratic process in our country, according to you?
Actually, there's so many, and our country is so vast, between, like you said, Manipur and Kerala, Assam and Rajasthan. Kashmir, I mean, how can we not speak about Kashmir, which has not seen an election for 10 years, which has been devalued from a state into union territories through an act of the executive act of the government without consulting the state assembly. So we've seen many, many levels of complete draconian powers of the state. So I think, we brought out this manifesto, I don't know if it makes sense, Citizens' Human Rights Manifesto for 2024, in which we are trying to argue the levels of reform that are required. Okay, so you need reforms in the electoral system, where maybe you need proportional representation to come in. So it's not the first past the post system. You need administrative reform. You need, like you said, judicial reform, where there's more representation and there's a decentralized judiciary. You need police reform, and you need repealment of draconian laws like
UAPA.
Not just UAPA, PMLA, state laws like Makoka, Public Security Act of Kashmir, Public Security Act of Chhattisgarh, Public Security Act in Tamil Nadu, and even the Dravidian governments are using it. Even the Kerala government here, CPM government is using UAPA. So when it comes to power, left, Dalit, upper caste, state power is used,
Correct.
So let's recognize that between identity politics and state power, there is no this thing. So we need state power to be democratized. If it is to be a government for the people, of the people, you need to repeal some of these laws, and you have to, the participatory governance has to be the answer. Gram Sabha, the whole Panchayati Raj Act was passed by the Rajiv Gandhi government. Why? To devolve power to the Gram Sabha. Now the UP government has reversed it by saying there will be no money given to the Gram Sabha. So you make a few steps forward and then the governments go 10 steps back. So I think by media not playing a role and not talking about some of these issues, and obviously our democracy is still a democracy in the making. Today it's an autocratizing democracy according to several international bodies. We are down on democratic deficit. Sorry, we are up on democratic deficit. We have a huge democratic deficit. So we need reforms on many fronts. Look at the electoral bonds, the funding issues. So I mean, there's so many issues to talk about that media ownership, the censorship of the media, the way the social media companies are structured and the way they are aligned to the state, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Meta, whether there's Facebook, whether there's YouTube. So the government has a lot of control over the flow of information, of the flow of capital. It's not just PMLA and UAPA, it's also FCRA.
Right.
Today, I think the biggest beneficiary of FCRA must be the RSS organization. Yes. So, and the minority organizations, 4,000 FCRA licenses have been cancelled, 12,000 licenses have been cancelled. We don't even know what is the list because it's not being talked about by the media. So, it's a completely skewed level of functioning, where electoral democracy is being misled as a constitutional democracy.
It was Indian political psychologist and theorist Ashish Nandy who diagnosed the fascist elements in Narendra Modi in 1992 when Narendra Modi was nobody but a small-time Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh Pacharak. I caught him in his article. He says, Modi, I met virtually all the criteria that psychologists, psychoanalysts and psychologists had set up after years of empirical work on the authoritarian personality. He had the same mix of Puritan rigidity, narrowing of emotional life, massive use of ego, defense of protection, denial and fear of his own passion combined with fantasies of violence. all set within the metrics of clear, paranoid and obsessive personality traits. Do you think Ashish Nandy was very accurate when we look back to the hegemonic power that he was implementing in India?
Actually, you should talk to Ashish Nandy because there was a case against him where he was asked to withdraw this.
Okay.
The case went up to the Supreme Court. But see, it's not about one personality. It's about when you talk about fascism or proto-fascism, it's about the reliance on a messiah-like figure who can supposedly cure all your problems, devoid of rationality, take away the people's power to reason, people's power to question, transfer economic resources to private capital. The question is, we are seeing that happening, which is why we use the word proto-fascist regime. But I will repeat, and I don't think it's about an individual. For me, the greatest danger is the organization called the RSS. The Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh are the khaki brown shirts of this regime. It is they who help the organizational coming together and political realization of the dream. Today, this man may or may not suit them. But it's the organizational might of the RSS that is almost 100 years old that I think we as Indians are underestimate. And the organizations needed to counter this, cadre-based, used to exist, need to be created, and are not robust enough today. That is our challenge. That do we have organizations to counter this extremely intensive brainwashing and transformation of individual, society and state that the RSS is responsible for? I think that is the greatest danger for us.
Thank you very much, Teesta. It was a great pleasure to have you here.
Thanks.